This computer. Hi, I'm BL Achman, and I have the good fortune to be here today with Steve Madden, who I am interviewing for the Beyond Social Media Show, the podcast for marketing, advertising, PR, and digital communications professionals. Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you are busy because you wear so many hats.
Hey, BL, thanks for having me.
So Steve is the general manager of MM+M, which is part of Haymarket US. And you wear so many hats. You're a writer, you're a reporter, you're an editor, you're a journalist, you're a promoter. So I'd like to discuss the vaccine project and also get your insights and your advice on what it takes to grow a successful newsletter. So first of all, the vaccine project, the first issue describes it as kind of a molecular Manhattan project. It's written by Steve Forster, and it addresses all the many moving parts of this whole vaccine situation we're all in. So can you please, I know that it came from the COVID report newsletter.
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
what made it necessary to have another newsletter just on the vaccine?
Well, Haymarket has several titles that operate in the Marcom space. MM+M PR Week, Campaign US among them. And what we realized when the vaccines were about to come to the market that, essentially what our colleagues in the laboratories have done is a molecular, like that great phrase from Jeff Forster, a molecular Manhattan project. It was now going to become the Marcom sector responsibility to deal with all the messaging around why you should get vaccinated. And as we know, there's vaccine hesitancy and there are just anti-vaxxers. And we decided that because our audience is the people who are going to be responsible for these campaigns, and in a lot of cases, the actual creative that would be encouraging people to get vaccinated and assure them of its safety, that we should pull together a newsletter that had all of our best content on this, and also pointed not just to Haymarket pieces, but pieces that would be of help to anyone working in this space, working on the messaging around it. So we had already been doing a COVID newsletter we started last March that was for all of Haymarket, not just for the Marcom sector. Haymarket has, I don't know, more than 30 different titles in the US and in the UK and in Germany. And there was an awful lot of information that was relevant to anyone who was following the pandemic closely. The Vaccine Project newsletter is a sort of a subset of that, if you will. In some ways, it's even more important, though, because the messaging work is so vital.
Is there more to the Vaccine Project newsletter than the newsletter? Is it part of a bigger piece?
No, it's sort of an offshoot of the COVID vaccine. Sorry, of the COVID-19 newsletter.
I've had both my shots, by the way.
Oh,
And,
congratulations! I've only had one.
there is such confusion around getting them. And it took a week just to make an appointment. I mean, really seriously, a week, like night and day, and trying all the crazy different sites. But so how is the newsletter being marketed?
So Haymarket, as you can imagine, has several, well, probably approaching 100 different sliced and diced email lists, and we market by sending the newsletter directly to people on these lists, and we put the stories. Sometimes there are stories that are created specifically for the newsletter. Those are placed on individual websites, and then there's a whole social media strategy around promoting those individual pieces that drive subscriptions to the newsletter.
Do you have numbers on how many people are getting this? I know it only started a little while ago. It's had like not that many issues, right?
The vaccine newsletter has been out for about a month.
Yeah.
and yeah, it just started at the end of January. So that's, yeah, it's about 5 weeks. And then the larger one,
COVID.
the COVID project, that started late in March last year. And early on in the pandemic, that was daily. We moved the cadence to weekly in June, and the vaccine project newsletter is weekly as well.
It's a really exhaustive deep dive into the news. And, the big issue, as I see it as a marketer, is changing minds. And there's so much disinformation. There's so much outrageous disinformation. And this newsletter has what people really do need to know. So what's the social aspect of it? How is it being promoted in social media? Because that's where so much of the disinformation lives.
We don't have like a big push into social media with the newsletter. Individual pieces that make up the newsletter will appear on social media. We haven't been doing anything in particular just for the singular newsletter. But I can tell you, it's an enormous amount of work. When the whole newsletter, coronavirus newsletter idea was came from Steve Barrett, who's the editor-in-chief of PR Week US. And he and I worked together to do the first couple of these newsletters. We're both big fans of Axios and everything that they do. So we modeled what we were doing on them, but keeping the focus within the Haymarket brands. And when I was writing the first one, and the first one, mind you, is just a sample. It wasn't meant for publication. I sat down on a Saturday morning with a cup of coffee and said, I'll just knock this thing out for an hour and then go do something else. Well, that coffee turned into a beer 5 hours later because it took an awful lot of work to pull everything together, because the production of a newsletter with that many links is a lot of work. We got faster, we got better at it as time went on. We would sort of create shared documents that were a series of links with briefs on what the article was about, and then it was up to the writer to go through that and pull it all together. I think Jeff is doing these things now. It's probably taking him 4 or 5 hours still to pull it together, but Jeff's a much more thorough writer than I am.
He says it's a really immersive process to do. And one of the things that I like about it is that at the end of it, he includes songs that are related to the topic of the week. And I've really never seen anybody else do anything like that. So what's really the best frequency for newsletters, and how many are you in charge of?
Well, it completely depends on the topic, right? There are newsletters. MM+M sends out a daily newsletter, or 5 days a week, called 5 Things for Farmer Marketers to Know. That's sort of a must read in the medical and health marketing space. That's important that come out daily, and it's important that it come out, that it be in everyone's inbox first thing in the morning when they sit down to start work. PR Week campaign. I also oversee brands that are part of a suite of products that cover long-term care and nursing home facilities and things like that. They all have newsletters, and a lot of times, in some of them, every one of our brands has a daily newsletter. And then there are specific newsletters on given topics that come out weekly. That cadence feels right. Like a weekly newsletter on the vaccine project feels right. I think anything more might be over it though.
And how do you interact with the subscribers? I see there are a lot of comments on a lot of the newsletters, but not so many on some others. So is there some way that you interact with the audiences?
Yeah, it's commenting. We encourage commenting on the individual articles, and these are relatively small communities. So a lot of times we actually know who the person is and might have a personal relationship with someone who's replying to something that they've read. Um, Different parts of our audience have different takes on a lot of the issues around it. You know, we all know that somehow, for some reason, wearing a mask became a political issue, and even though it was a tenet of basic science to wear a mask to help stop the spread, and most of our titles are rooted in reality, we like to think, including science. We still heard from people saying, you know, you guys are squishy liberals and, you know, foisting this stuff on us and everything else.
Well, they could
So
unsubscribe, you know?
that's right. You know, you don't like what you're seeing on TV, turn the channel.
Yeah.
And that's the case here too. So
So I know that PR Week is a paid subscription. How many of the newsletters in the MM and N, which is so hard to say, category are subscription paid newsletters?
so none of the newsletters are free for anyone who wants them. You can just sign up for them. You can hit the subscribe button at the bottom, or there are places on the sites to all the various sites to sign up for the newsletters. Um, and when you click on an article that carries you to, oh, sorry, when you click on a link that carries you to an article that's gated, it's coded in such a way that you'll, even if you aren't a subscriber, you'll be able to see it and read the article.
So then advertising is how they're supported?
Yes, we have a great sponsor in W2O. They've taken this on, the vaccine project, on as a cause that's just so important to, you know, when I said that our colleagues in the labs did a Manhattan project, W2O and some other large marketing agencies see spreading the word about the safety and the efficacy of vaccines to all communities that need them. They see that as their personal Manhattan project. I think everyone working in Marcoms around this topic realizes that this is probably the most important thing that they'll work on in their career, and certainly the most rewarding. So yeah, W2O has sponsored us with advertisements, and we're doing roundtables and podcasts and webinars with them as well.
I was listening on Saturday to a group of doctors on Clubhouse talking about the vaccine and talking about the issues with the disinformation. And some of the doctors who are promoting vaccines have actually reported getting death threats. You know, this has just become such a crazy political thing. But I think that what you're doing with this newsletter and the COVID newsletter are really a great service to people who work in communications, because it is so hard to keep up with all of this. So for me, this is required reading, because I am trying to follow this as a marketer and trying to understand like what's being done, you know, to change this situation. And it's a very hard thing to do. So it seems to me like information is, you know, the more the merrier, the better there is. But I wonder, like, what qualify, how do you define a successful newsletter? What are some of the ways that newsletters can become more successful? You know, if you have a small audience and not a ton of money, how would you grow your newsletter?
I mean, it sounds trite. It might even sound like I'm evading the question, but it's all about quality and relevancy. You know, if you get a newsletter, you know, we all get tons of newsletters, and if you get one, and you know, after 2 or 3 days, you realize like, I don't need this. It's not telling me anything I don't already know, or it's not telling me anything I feel like I must know. Um, then I unsubscribe. And so I sort of feel like a successful newsletter, to answer your question, is essentially uh, an agenda memo for that day or that week's meeting, right? You need to read this because this is what everyone is going to be talking about, or what everyone should be talking about. And so that's why producing great content, aggregating it carefully, being respectful of the reader's time, While at the still time, at the same time, realizing that you still have to engage them. Um, that's sort of where the you mentioned earlier the 5 songs that we select at the end of the newsletters. That's kind of where that comes from. Early in the days of the coronavirus pandemic, we had a single person, Deborah Stoll, dedicated to writing this. Deborah was brand new to the company. No one has actually ever met her personally,
Just a
and
lot of
and
that's happened in the last
and,
year.
and she was hunkering down out on Long Island to stay socially distant. So she's off there by herself, writing about what felt like the end of the world, and so she started adding songs at the end just to cheer herself up and to say to the readers, like, um, Here Comes the Sun by George Harrison, or Lovely Day by Bill Withers, stuff like that, just to perk people up. And then it just became this thing. And it's a super important engagement tool. People love it. People really look for it.
I play the songs at the end of the newsletter because it's fun. And like you said, I mean, you just need to cheer yourself up,
Yeah.
especially after you read all the news about COVID. But it
And
does look like the ad council is trying really hard to, to encourage people to get the vaccine. And it doesn't look like enough is coming out. It doesn't look like, I'm not seeing it on the side of buses. I'm not seeing it everywhere that I go. And I wonder what it's going to take to make that happen. And I know a newsletter can't be the only answer to that. There has to be some involvement on the level of industry and of government. And, I mean, it's a big project you've taken
it,
on.
it is. And I think that I agree with you that I haven't seen, like, display or public place advertising. But what I have done, just because I'm following this, is I'm seeing that the Marcom's industry is using every conceivable channel that's available to them. If Black communities have a special hesitancy toward this because of the Tuskegee project, the communicators are becoming very adept at selecting the right KOLs to help them spread the message. So you might not see it on the side of a bus, but you might see it in Instagram or TikTok feeds that you might not otherwise be following. And I think that that's where a lot of the work is being focused. My colleague at W2O, Aaron Strout, said, he put it, I've ripped this phrase off from him so much. He's like, look, we're working on the swing states here. We're not, if something is solidly red or blue, we don't need to focus our work there. We need to focus our work on the people who are movable. And so I think that's where a big focus of the work is going.
What did you call that in the newsletter? The mutable middle, or there was a word for it, a phrase for it, saying that was the target, the people whose minds might be changed, as opposed to
Right.
those who might never change their minds. But even
Well,
there, it's a huge job.
it is. And what I've found personally is how surprising it is at some of the people who have said that they're going to wait and see because they feel like this thing was rushed. These are, otherwise very intelligent, college educated people who just, for whatever reason, have their reasons. It's like, oh, I don't do pharmaceuticals. Like, I don't even take aspirin, so I'm not going to get this. And
Honestly, that was me at the beginning. I was thinking, like, I'll just wait and see how everybody else does with this, and wait. And then I started reading, and then I started listening, and then I started researching. And the thing that's clear is that so far nobody's died from the vaccine, but 500,000 people in this country alone have died from COVID. And if you do get it, you may have it for the rest of your life. So whatever side effects there were, and there were side effects from the second shot, they were not the same as ending up in a hospital on a ventilator, which is not something anybody would want to do. But as you're saying, like, there are intelligent people, and I think to a large degree, it is a matter of information. It is a matter of hitting them over and over again with factual data. And, that's why we have to love Dr. Fauci so much. I mean, he just
it's also a question of of talking with people and finding out like what's the root of the hesitancy. Um, a friend of mine, I just had a call around Christmas just to catch up with an old friend, and we were talking about the vaccine. And this is this is an extremely smart guy who's worked in science and medicine, communications his entire life. Son of an academic chemist. So not someone who's averse to the scientific process, right? I said, so, are you going to get it? And he said, no, I probably will, but I'm really, really hesitant. And it turns out that that he is deathly afraid of needles, and that so much of the imaging about let's say you were coming up with a poster for why you should get vaccinated, showed pretty graphic images of the needles. And I don't know about you, I'm not afraid of needles, but I was really struck by just how big that needle was before they stuck it in my arm.
And you
And
see it everywhere. Every
right,
time they discuss the vaccine, all you're seeing them people poking needles into people. And I think I read that 25% of people are needle phobic. I'm not a phobic, but I sure don't want to know too much about
no,
how big the
but
needle is.
it's really important to realize that if 25% of the population is deathly afraid of these things, then maybe the messaging shouldn't include images that set off a visceral response in them.
And also on the needle, there seems to be some sort of a device that sticks out of the needle. That, like, what is that? Does that hurt you? I mean, I got to say, the shots hurt, but shots do. And it was quite, it's temporary. It was no more than any other shot, really. But
Now, I've been immunized for yellow fever for travel, and the yellow fever vaccine, or the injection, was by far more painful than this.
really,
So yeah, but on the other hand, I put up with some short-term pain so that I could travel to Central Africa and not get yellow fever. That to me is a miracle of science.
on to Africa. Tell me a little bit about BikeTown Africa. I know you're a
Oh
big
wow,
cyclist.
wow, you dug that up. That's great. Yeah, BikeTown. So BikeTown was a project we created sort of in the middle of winter to fill pages when I was the editor-in-chief of Bicycling Magazine way back when. And we went to a town, and we went to Portland, Maine, and gave away 50 bikes and followed people around for 3 months to see what they did with the bikes. And then we reported on them. And it just became this thing. Like the next year we did 5 towns, and then the year after that we did 20. And while all this was going on, a friend of mine who works for Bristol Myers Squibb came and said, have you ever thought about doing something like this in Africa, where there's a really acute need to get antiretroviral drugs for AIDS out into the field, right? And these are places that if people are walking to bring, like if nurses or med techs are walking 6 kilometers, 10 kilometers a day to visit patients. If you give them a bike, they'd be able to increase the number of patients they could see dramatically. So we worked with Kona bicycles, who very generously took a sketch from us about a bike that would meet the very specific needs of riding in rural, desertified Africa for the first part of the project, where there are terrible thorns and dust that can really gum up a bike's works. And we brought over, I think the first batch was 100 bikes, and eventually we've given away about 3,000 bikes to
Really?
help. Well, when this project started in 2006, it was about distributing ARVs and food to sort of the drugs were kind of harsh and needed to be taken on a full stomach. And now that AIDS has sort of been, the drugs are more widely available and the transmission has slowed, we've sort of turned the focus to education, giving bikes to kids, particularly girls, so that they can get to school.
What a wonderful project.
It's a great project. My partner in that, David Brienza, carries the lion's share of the work now and keeps it going. And I can't wait to be able to travel again to go back and do it.
All of us. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. I think the vaccine project is a really important one, and I look forward to telling our listeners about it. So thank you very much.
Well, this has been great. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks.